Easy explain for polygenism. So for this topic in non-Mendelian genetics, we're going to be actually looking at the example of human skin color, which I think works pretty well. Human skin color in reality is incredibly complex. We actually still don't even understand it fully, given the amount of factors that are at play. But for our purposes today, to understand just what polygenism is, human skin color is just going to work great. So to begin here, what does it mean to be a polygenic trait? What does polygenism even mean? Well, contrary to Mendelian genetics, what Mendel thought was that for every one trait, there's one gene, right? One gene equals one trait. In this case, we're still looking at one trait, right? We're looking at the color of the skin. But now it's being determined by multiple genes. We know there's more than one gene at work here. There's more than one gene at play. So polygenism, right? Polygenetic traits, that just means there's multiple genes determining our one trait. So again, today we're going to look at skin color. Again, just making a note that skin color is actually very complex. There's also environmental factors. There can be mutations. And there's way more genes involved than just 3. But for today's example, I did my best to simplify it, which kind of makes it inaccurate, but you know, it kind of works for what we're trying to do, just to get the idea across, the visual across. So for this lesson, for today, let's just think of the polygenism of human skin color as really just operating with 3 genes, right? Let's just go with that. So the first gene, this is a real gene. It's called eumelanin, and I'm just using it. I'm just using the letter E to represent the alleles here, the uppercase for dominant, lowercase for recessive. And this is just basic pigmentations, right? Just basic pigments we would find in our cells. And here we're going to see the basic spectrum from blacker pigments to blonder pigments. Second gene at play here, again, it's a real pigment. It's called pheomelanin. To represent this one, I'm just going to use the letter R, uppercase and lowercase for dominant and recessive. And here's where we see the more the reds, the yellows, and the whites. Those kinds of pigmentations in our skin. They're going to be being coded for by the pheomelanin alleles that we have. And finally, the third gene, and this is where it really gets complex, it's a gene that just regulates the other genes, right? It's a regulator gene. So, and there's a lot of these going on, but just to kind of sum up a few genes here is one, the melanin regulator, based on the alleles you get from this one, which I'm representing with an M, uppercase and lowercase m's, it will determine which melanin is favored, which one is pronounced, which one becomes more visual and apparent. So you can kind of see how that breakdown is working in our heredity here as well for today's working example. So, again, keep in mind, this is complex. It's complex to track polygenism across 3 genes, but even in our reality of human heredity, it's even more complex than this. So just keep that in mind. We're kind of simplifying this example today. So just going to scroll down a bit here. So to set this up, right, the last thing we need to keep in mind is dominance, right? The different patterns of dominance that can be at play here. And in terms of the blending, right, and visualizing the immense spectrum we have in human skin color, let's just assume that in every single relationship, in every pairing, all the alleles are incompletely dominant to each other, right? They'll allow us to really see most of the blend that we have in the spectrum. So now let's make up 2 people, right? And I kind of just made these 2 people up at random, and they're completely heterozygous for all 3 genes, right? So they have a dominant and a recessive copy for each of the 3 genes across. So this is what their genotype would look like if we're going to track their genotype before they reproduce here. And what would they look like, right? If they're completely heterozygous across all 3 genes, they're going to have an average skin color, right? So in humans, that's some kind of light brown, light tan. We're assuming there's no UV radiation exposure, right? We're assuming they're not laying out in the sun with oils, trying to become darker, right? Get that nice that sun glow everybody loves so much. So we're just going to assume they're, basic skin shade, their basic skin colors in the light brown tan range. That's probably how we would describe it. But let's actually send them through meiosis, right? Let's get their cells ready to reproduce. So going through meiosis, how are all the alleles going to separate? We have a lot of potential combinations in these gametes, right? In these sex cells, whether they're sperm or egg. And you can kind of see all the different allele combinations there. It's quite a few. Right, what I did, I just broke up each of those genes and resorted them, and that's what we're working with. So to set this up in a Punnett square now, to actually see how this would reproduce out is pretty intimidating. I went ahead and did that already. Yikes is right. I also tried to give them some color so you could kind of see how the pigmentation would play out and see what our spectrum is, going from very, very light skin to very, very dark skin. And so, again, this is very complex. This is also very oversimplified. Start to look down here, right? This isn't actually how skin color works. It's even more complex than this. But hopefully this gives you a good idea of how, a single trait can be determined by many genes, right? That's something we would call a polygenic trait. Simplified example here of what that looks like in human skin color. And hopefully this kind of helps to put it in perspective just how complex it can be. But there's also something at play here called epigenetics, right? That's a topic for a whole other time, but that's really how the environment can start to really affect and interact with genes and their expressions. But for now, I hope that helps. That's a pretty solid example of polygenic traits, otherwise known as polygenism. Best of luck in your quiz or test.